The gavel didn't just sentence me to 10 years in federal prison. It hammered the final nail into the coffin of the girl I used to be. That girl, Elara Vance, believed in things like family, loyalty, and the inherent goodness of the world. She believed that if you worked hard and told the truth, everything would be okay. That girl was a fool, and she died in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom under the merciless glare of fluorescent lights, condemned by the two men she loved most in the world. If this were some story you were reading online, you'd probably like it. Maybe even leave a comment saying how crazy it is. You might even share it with a friend, just to see their reaction. But this isn't a story. This was my life, stripped down to its bare, brutal bones, and the crazy part was just getting started. Before the fall, my life was a gilded cage I didn't even recognize as confinement. I was the vice president of innovation at Vance Global, a tech behemoth founded by my grandfather and now ruled by my father, Marcus Vance. He was a titan carved from granite and ambition, a man whose approval I chased like a starving dog chases a scrap of meat. His heir apparent, my older brother Julian, was the company's public face. He had our father's charisma, but none of his substance, a beautifully tailored suit with nothing inside. I was the brains, the one tucked away in the research and development labs, creating the algorithms and patents that kept our company light years ahead of the competition. My latest creation, a decentralized transaction protocol I called Ethel, was set to revolutionize secure data transfer. It was my masterpiece, the culmination of years of work. It was also the weapon they would use to destroy me. The first tremor of the earthquake that would shatter my world came on a Tuesday. I was running a final diagnostic on Ethel's integration into our primary servers when I found it, a ghost ledger buried deep in the code. It mirrored our primary accounts, but with encrypted subledgers funneling millions of dollars into shell corporations I'd never heard of. It was slick, expertly hidden, and terrifying. My first thought wasn't malice, it was mistake. A glitch. A security breach. I printed the corrupted code strings and went straight to the only person I trusted implicitly, my brother. I found Julian in his corner office, a glass box overlooking the glittering expanse of downtown Chicago. He was on the phone, laughing, his feet propped up on his vast mahogany desk. He looked every bit the young king he was being groomed to be. When he saw the look on my face, his smile faltered. "Ellie, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, laying the papers on his desk. "I think we have one in the system." He scanned the pages, his brow furrowing. The performative concern in his eyes was so convincing, so perfectly pitched, I felt my own panic begin to recede. He traced the lines of code with his finger, whistling low. "This is sophisticated, way above my pay grade. We need to show this to Dad." We went to our father's office on the top floor, the corporate equivalent of Mount Olympus. Marcus Vance didn't just occupy a room, he commanded it. He sat behind a desk the size of a small car, the city's skyline his personal backdrop. He listened, his face an unreadable mask, as Julian explained what I'd found. He took the papers, his gaze sweeping over them. There wasn't a flicker of surprise, not a hint of alarm. There was only a quiet, unnerving stillness. "Leave this with me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Elara, you did good work finding this. Let us handle it from here. It's likely a minor accounting error, magnified by the new system's sensitivity. Julian, walk your sister out. I need to make some calls." Julian put an arm around my shoulder as we walked back toward my lab. "See? I told you it was nothing to worry about. Dad's got this. That's why he's the king." He squeezed my shoulder, a gesture that had once felt protective, but now, in hindsight, felt like a man steadying his aim. "You just focus on getting Ethel ready for the launch. It's going to be your masterpiece." For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of blissful ignorance. I worked, I ate, I slept, convinced the problem had been handled by the powerful men in my life. I put the ghost ledger out of my mind. The day the SEC raided Vance Global, I was in the server room, my hair tied up in a messy bun, my glasses perched on my nose, feeling happier than I had in months. The launch was a week away. They came in a swarm, dark suits, grim faces, and badges that glinted like sharks' teeth. They swept through the building, seizing computers, files, everything. I was led to a conference room where 2 agents sat waiting for me. They were polite, but their questions were like daggers, each one aimed at my heart. They asked about offshore accounts, about wire transfers, about shell corporations. And then they showed me the evidence. My digital signature was on every fraudulent transfer. The ghost accounts had been opened using my personal credentials. The money was being funneled through a backdoor I had supposedly coded into Ethel myself. They had emails, logs, financial statements, an entire mountain of fabricated proof that painted me as a master criminal. My masterpiece had been twisted into a weapon, and its barrel was pointed directly at my head. That night, I was allowed to go home, pending the formal charges. I drove not to my apartment, but to the family estate in Lake Forest. I needed to see them. I needed them to fix this, to explain the monstrous misunderstanding. I found them in the library, a room filled with the scent of old leather and wood smoke. My father was staring into the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Julian was standing by the window, looking out into the darkness. "They think I did it," I said, my voice breaking. "The SEC. They think I stole millions of dollars. They have evidence. It's all fake. It's all it has to be a mistake." My father turned slowly, his face etched in shadow. The expression on it was not one of sympathy or anger. It was one of grim resolution. "It's not a mistake, Elara." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "What?" "The company was in trouble," he continued, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Certain investments went south. We needed liquidity to avoid a collapse. Sacrifices had to be made." I stared at him, my mind refusing to process the words. I looked at Julian, pleading with my eyes for him to deny it, to say this was some horrible joke. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He just took a slow sip of his drink, his reflection a pale specter in the dark glass. "Sacrifices," I whispered. "You're sacrificing me?" "You are a Vance," my father said, as if that explained everything. "You have a duty to this family, to its legacy. The company must survive. Julian must be protected. He is the future." The coldness of it was more violent than any physical blow. I was not his daughter. I was a component, a pawn to be discarded to save the king and his heir. The betrayal was so immense, so absolute, it was like a black hole, sucking all the light and warmth from the universe. "You did this," I said, my voice gaining a raw, ragged edge. "You planted the evidence. You used my work, my name. You framed your own daughter." Julian finally turned from the window. The smirk I saw on his face will be burned into my memory until the day I die. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Don't be so dramatic, Ellie. Think of it as taking one for the team. You were always so good at being the smart one. Be smart now. Be quiet." The trial was a farce. My family's expensive lawyers put up a defense as flimsy as tissue paper. They painted me as a disgruntled, greedy genius, resentful of her brother's success. My protests of innocence were portrayed as the desperate lies of a cornered criminal. My father and brother sat in the front row every day, their faces masks of sorrow and disappointment for the cameras. They were magnificent actors. When the jury foreman read the verdict, guilty on all counts, I didn't cry. I looked at my family. My father gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Julian simply looked bored. They led me away in handcuffs. The last thing I saw was Julian placing a comforting hand on our father's shoulder, the perfect image of the dutiful son who would now steer the family legacy safely into the future. A future built on my bones. Now I sit in a concrete box. The girl who loved her family is dead and buried under 10 years of injustice. But from that grave, something else has crawled out. Something colder, harder, and infinitely more patient. Every night, I close my eyes and I see my father's stony face and my brother's triumphant smirk. I let the hatred burn away the tears. It's a slow fire, a fuel that will last me a decade. They told me I had a duty to the family, and I will perform it. I will be the sacrifice they wanted me to be. But when I'm done, I will be the only thing left of the Vance legacy. My name is Elara Vance, and my family has no idea that the ghost they thought they buried is coming back to haunt them. They think the story is over. But they've forgotten one thing about the stories our father used to read to us. The real monster never shows up until the second act. The FCI Pekin Federal Prison for Women is a world stripped of color, a universe of concrete gray and khaki beige, where the only vibrant things are the bruises and the simmering rage in 1,000 pairs of eyes. I learned the currency of this new world quickly. It wasn't money, it was information, favors, and the quiet, unblinking promise of violence. I learned to walk with my shoulders back and my gaze level. I learned to listen more than I spoke. I learned that the naive girl who entered these gates was a liability, so I killed her off, piece by piece, until all that was left was a cold, hard diamond of purpose. My fury was the pressure, and time was the heat. The prison was my forge. My education began in the law library, a small, dusty room that smelled of decaying paper and desperation. That's where I met Maria Reyes. She was a lifer, a former forensic accountant for one of the Big Four firms who had stumbled upon a senator's corruption and refused to look away. They buried her under a mountain of bogus conspiracy charges. Maria was in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that saw everything. She saw me, hunched over case law books day after day, trying to unravel the legal knots that had bound me. One afternoon, she sat down opposite me, her plastic tray of bland food untouched. "You read like a woman trying to find a loophole," she said, her voice low and even. "There are no loopholes in a conviction like yours." It was airtight. I read the transcripts. I looked up, startled. "How?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I have my ways. You weren't convicted on evidence, Elara. You were convicted on narrative. Your family wrote a story, and the jury bought the bestseller. From that day on, Maria became my professor, my strategist, my mentor. She taught me to see the law not as a set of rules, but as a weapon. We dissected my case, not looking for innocence, but for the architecture of the frame-up. She taught me how to read financial statements like a predator reads a trail of blood, showing me how they would have layered the transactions, hidden the debt, and created the digital breadcrumbs that led to my door. "They built a beautiful cage," she'd say, tapping a page of the prosecutor's evidence list. "But every cage has a lock, and every lock has a key. Our job is to build it." But Maria's expertise was in the physical world of paper and law. The world that had truly condemned me was digital. For that, I needed a different kind of teacher. I needed a ghost. Ava Ghost, Chen was a legend in Pekin. A wisp of a girl with a shock of dyed purple hair and a mind that moved at the speed of light, she was serving 5 years for hacking the Department of Defense. The rumor was she didn't do it for money or politics. She did it to prove she could. Ava saw the entire world as a system, a set of firewalls waiting to be breached. She was cynical, sarcastic, and trusted no one. It took me 6 months to earn a 5-minute conversation with her. I did it by solving the notoriously difficult cryptographic puzzle the prison warden, a chess fanatic, posted in the weekly newsletter. I left the solution on Ava's bunk. "Cute," she said the next day, cornering me by the laundry machines. "You've got a brain. So what? You want me to teach you how to code a virus on a contraband calculator. I want you to tell me how they did it." I said, my voice low. "I designed a decentralized protocol, Ethel. It was theoretically impossible to create a backdoor without compromising the entire blockchain. But they did it, and they made it look like I was the architect." For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine interest in her dark, restless eyes. The challenge, the puzzle. I had baited the hook perfectly. We began to talk, first in clipped, coded sentences in the yard, then in more detail during our shared janitorial shifts. I described my system's architecture from memory, every line of code, every security layer. Ava would listen, her eyes closed, visualizing the matrix. She was a digital prodigy, and she saw the ghost in my machine. "They didn't build a backdoor," she explained one night, our whispers swallowed by the hum of the floor buffer. "That's amateur hour. They built a parasitic twin, a mirror system that ran parallel to yours. It used your protocol's verification handshake to legitimize its own fraudulent transactions. It's elegant, diabolical. Your signature wouldn't have been forged. The system would have requested it for a legitimate looking process, while the parasite did the dirty work. You were signing your own death warrant with every diagnostic you ran." With Ava's digital expertise and Maria's knowledge of financial crimes, the full picture began to emerge. This was bigger than just covering corporate losses. The sheer volume of money, the complexity of the shell corporations, the choice of offshore banks. Maria recognized the patterns. "This isn't just white-collar fraud, Elara," she said, her face grim as we reviewed our notes, written on scraps of toilet paper. "This is cartel money. The Zetas, or someone like them. Your father didn't just save his company. He turned it into a laundromat for murderers." The realization hit me like a physical blow. My father and brother hadn't just sacrificed me for their legacy. They had sold their souls and my future to monsters. Any lingering sentiment I had, any microscopic shred of the daughter I used to be, turned to ash. My quest for justice was no longer enough. This wasn't about clearing my name. This was about eradication. I didn't want to just expose them. I wanted to burn their world to the ground and dance on its embers. Maria saw the shift in me. She saw the cold fire in my eyes, and it worried her. "Vengeance is a poison, Hija," she warned me. "It burns the vessel that holds it." "I'm already burned," I replied, my voice flat. "All I have left is the scar." The proof of her words came in the form of a smuggled copy of Forbes magazine. There, on the cover, was Julian. The headline read, "The Visionary, Julian Vance and the Ethel Revolution." The article was a nauseating piece of PR fluff, praising his genius, his leadership, his courage in taking over the company after his sister's tragic downfall. He was photographed in my old office, smiling that same charming, empty smile, accepting accolades for my work. My masterpiece. He had my life. He had my name. He had my future. I tore the cover off the magazine, and in the dark of my cell, I held it until my knuckles were white and the glossy paper was shredded into meaningless confetti. My parole hearing was scheduled for the fall, my 7th year inside. We decided it was time to make our first move. It had to be small, untraceable, a pinprick to see if the giant would bleed. Ava, using a burner phone smuggled in by a guard on Maria's payroll, breached the outer defenses of Vance Global's network. It was child's play for her. From there, she didn't steal money or data. She made a single, tiny change to the quarterly earnings report due to be released the next day. She altered the depreciation schedule on a fleet of company vehicles, an error so mundane it would bypass any automated check, but one that would result in a discrepancy of several $1 million once the official SEC filing was cross-referenced. Then, she sent an anonymous, encrypted email to a financial blogger Maria knew from her old life, a rabid pit bull named Ben Carter who lived to expose corporate malfeasance. The email simply said, "Check the depreciation figures in Vance Global's 10Q filing. Something doesn't add up. Happy hunting." It was a stone cast into the water. We wouldn't see the ripples for weeks, but the stone was thrown. The day of my parole hearing arrived. I walked into the room wearing a borrowed, ill-fitting suit, my hands steady, my heart a block of ice. I sat at the table, a model of reformed penitence. Maria had coached me for months. I was remorseful for my past mistakes, focused on my rehabilitation, and eager to rejoin society as a productive member. I recited the words like an actor in a play. I scanned the faces of the 3 board members. 2 were strangers, their expressions bored and bureaucratic. The third one made my blood run cold. It was Arthur Kenway, a name from my past, a man who sat on 3 corporate boards with my father. He used to come to our house for Christmas, drinking my father's expensive scotch and laughing at his jokes. A loyal soldier in the Vance Empire. My father had placed him here. He was the gatekeeper, the final lock on my cage, sent to ensure I rotted in prison for my full term. He looked at my file, then up at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed by a look of utter contempt. A slow, condescending smile spread across his face as he prepared to speak, the chairman clearing his throat to signal the beginning of the end. Arthur Kenway was about to deny my parole, to deliver the verdict my father had ordered from on high. He believed he held all the power. He believed the story was over. He had no idea I was the one holding the pen now, and I was just about to write a new chapter. Arthur Kenway leaned forward, the very picture of patriarchal authority, his mouth opening to deliver the final, crushing blow. He held my future in his manicured hands and was about to clench it into dust. The air in the small, stuffy room grew thick with my father's power. But Maria had taught me that in a rigged game, you don't play by the rules. You flip the whole damn table. Right as Kenway was about to speak, the door opened. A young, harried-looking man in a rumpled suit entered and handed a file to the board chairman. He was my pro bono lawyer, a contact from Maria's extensive network of people chewed up and spat out by the system. "Apologies for the interruption, gentlemen," he said, his voice deceptively mild. "A new document has come to light regarding Ms. Vance's original trial that we feel is pertinent to her rehabilitation profile." The chairman opened the file. Inside was a sworn affidavit from a former night shift clerk at the courthouse where I was tried. It was a masterpiece of insinuation, crafted by Maria and given technological life by Ava. The clerk didn't claim to have witnessed a bribe. He simply stated, under oath, that he had observed my father's lead counsel having an unscheduled, 2-hour, late-night meeting in the judge's chambers the day before jury instructions were given. It was nothing concrete. It was smoke. But in the world of federal parole boards, where even the hint of a scandal could end careers, smoke is as dangerous as fire. The chairman's face went pale. He slid the paper over to Kenway. I watched the condescending smirk melt from my father's friend's face, replaced by a flash of fury, then cold, calculated panic. A public appeal citing potential judicial misconduct would be a media circus. It was a mess they did not want. I said nothing, maintaining the placid mask of a reformed inmate, but inside I was roaring. Kenway looked at me, his eyes promising retribution, but he was trapped. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod to the chairman. 30 minutes later, I was signing my release papers. The strict conditions of my parole felt less like chains and more like a starting pistol. I walked out of the gates of FCI Pekin into the bright, overwhelming Illinois sunlight with nothing but $20 and a cheap bus ticket. I was a ghost, free from my tomb and ready to begin my haunting. The world had moved on without me. Cars were quieter, phones were sleeker, and people stared down at glowing screens, more connected to the digital ether than to the person standing next to them. It was a world perfectly suited for someone who didn't want to be seen. I took a room in a dilapidated boarding house on the south side of Chicago, a place that smelled of boiled cabbage and regret. I got a job as a night shift data entry clerk in a sterile office park, a mind-numbing, anonymous existence. To my parole officer, I was Model Citizen 778, AC. To the world, I was no one. Elara Vance was an ex-con, a ghost story her family told to frighten new investors. And that was exactly how I wanted it. A week after my release, I followed a set of coded instructions from Maria to a defunct meatpacking warehouse by the river. The air was thick with the phantom smell of slaughter. In a cavernous, refrigerated room, surrounded by humming servers and a web of cables, I found Ava. She looked healthier, her hair now a defiant shade of electric blue. She had turned this forgotten space into a digital fortress, the nerve center for our coming war. "Welcome home, Warden," she said without looking up from her bank of monitors, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "Hope you like the decor. I call it industrial decay chic." We were a team. I was the strategist, the one with intimate knowledge of the enemy's psychology and infrastructure. Ava was my weapon, a digital scalpel capable of slicing through any firewall on Earth. And Maria, our queen, still on the inside, was our grandmaster, her moves relayed through encrypted messages passed through her network, guiding us with her decades of wisdom. Our campaign began not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. We would bleed Vance global slowly, unraveling it thread by thread. "A frontal assault, a suicide," I told Ava, pointing at a schematic of the company's network architecture I had drawn from memory. We attacked the perception. We attacked their pride. Our first target was Ethel, my stolen masterpiece. Ava didn't crash the system. She infected it with a gremlin. She wrote a small, elegant piece of code that introduced infinitesimal data lags, just milliseconds, but enough to cause periodic settlement delays in major international transactions. To the company's engineers, it was a ghost, a baffling anomaly they couldn't trace. To Vance Global's high-volume clients in banking and logistics, it was an unacceptable flaw. Confidence in Julian's revolutionary technology began to fray. Next, we went after Julian himself. His arrogance was his Achilles heel. Using a series of dark web data brokers, Ava acquired a full profile of his personal spending. The man was a walking cliché of new money excess. We packaged his receipts for custom suits, his bar tabs that ran into the thousands, his lease on a McLaren, and leaked it all to Ben Carter, Maria's pitbull blogger. The headline, Vance Global CEO parties while stock stagnates was a minor embarrassment, but it was the first crack in his carefully polished public image. Then we turned the knife. We knew Julian had a gambling problem. Using a sophisticated new voice cloning algorithm Ava had developed, we took audio from his public speeches and interviews. We crafted a perfect deepfake. A 30-second clip of his voice, frantic and arrogant, placing a massive, illegal bet against the Chicago Bears with a known bookie. Ava routed the audio file to the private inbox of a rival CEO, a man Julian had publicly humiliated a year prior. Within an hour, rumors of the reckless CEO of Vance Global were swirling through the trading floors. The stock dipped 7 points. The final piece of our opening salvo was aimed at my father. Marcus Vance had spent a decade laundering his reputation, becoming a pillar of Chicago philanthropy. His annual Vance Foundation Gala was the city's premier charity event. It took Ava less than a day to slice through his foundation's shoddy security. We discovered what we already suspected. The charity was a sham, a tax shelter and a slush fund for political lobbying. We didn't leak everything. We chose one specific, damning document, a proposal to divert funds meant for a children's hospital wing to the re-election campaign of a notoriously corrupt senator, and sent it to the Chicago Tribune. The blowback was immediate. Julian, panicked by the stock drop and the whispers from his clients, stormed into my father's office. I knew this because I was watching. We had piggybacked a micro camera onto a routine pest control inspection of the Vance Tower. The tiny lens, hidden in a smoke detector, gave me a god's eye view of my old life. "This is a coordinated attack," Julian yelled, his face flushed. "Our rivals are trying to sink us. What are you doing about it?" My father sat behind his desk, imperious and calm. "It is noise, Julian. The buzzing of flies. You are letting them rattle you. Show some strength. You are a Vance." He couldn't even conceive of the true source of his problems. In his world, I was a footnote, a problem solved years ago. His arrogance was my greatest shield. A few nights later, I was parked across the street from Julian's Lincoln Park mansion, doing my own surveillance. The lights were on, casting a warm, inviting glow. Through the large bay window, I saw him playing on the floor with his young son. The boy, my nephew, couldn't have been more than 5. He had my mother's curls. A wave of something cold and sickening washed over me. This child was innocent. His life, his future, was intertwined with the man I was systematically destroying. For a heart-stopping moment, the ghost I had become felt the pain of the girl I had been. Was Maria right? Was this poison hollowing me out, leaving me as monstrous as them? Then I remember the courtroom. I remember the cold finality in my father's voice and the triumphant smirk on Julian's face. They didn't just take my life, they took my future children, my future everything. They had chosen the legacy of Vance Global over me. I would simply return the favor. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. The campaign needed to escalate. I needed to know what they were planning, what their next move was. Ava had found a potential vulnerability in the Vance family's new, state-of-the-art smart home security system at the Lake Forest estate. It was a long shot, but she was confident. That night, from our warehouse lair, Ava breached the firewall. "I'm in," she whispered, her face illuminated by the green glow of the code scrolling across her screen. "Which camera do you want?" "The study," I said without hesitation. "My father's sanctuary." An image flickered to life on the main monitor. It was him. He was older, grayer, but just as imposing, sitting in his leather chair, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was on a video call. The man on the other end was rough, with a scarred face and cold, dead eyes. My blood froze. I recognized him from the cartel files Maria and I had studied in the prison library. He was Mateo El Verdugo Vargas, the executioner, a top enforcer for the Zetas. Ava's software began scrolling a rough, real-time translation of their Spanish conversation on the side of the screen. Vargas was agitated. He was talking about the ethyl glitches, the media attention. He was getting nervous. Then he said a name. My name. The translation flashed on the screen. That loose end. The sister. Her release could bring attention. My father took a slow sip of his whiskey. He looked directly into the camera, though he was looking at Vargas. His face was a mask of placid control. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs, as I read the final, chilling words of his response. The girl is nothing. A ghost. If she ever becomes a problem, I will handle my daughter personally. The sight of my father's face, so calm as he promised a killer he would handle his own daughter, severed the last frayed thread of connection to my past. The girl who had flinched at the thought of hurting her nephew was gone, cauterized in the cold fire of that single, translated sentence. This was no longer a chess match. He had overturned the board and pulled out a knife. My desire for justice, my carefully constructed plans for a slow, meticulous revenge, they all felt like child's play. This was now a war of annihilation, a zero-sum game. Only one of us would be left standing when the smoke cleared. He's hunting us, I said, my voice eerily calm as I turned away from the monitor. Ava was already typing furiously, her face grim. He can't hunt what he can't see. I've scrubbed our tracks from his system. For now, we're a ghost again. But Ellie, this changes the timeline. We have to move fast. No more pinpricks. We need a kill shot. I agreed. But first, I wanted to unravel him. Marcus Vance's strength was his unshakable control, his belief that he was the master of his own universe. I wanted to show him that a ghost was pulling his strings. The psychological campaign began the next night. The first move was a flower. Our mother had cultivated a garden of rare night-blooming cereus at the Lake Forest estate, delicate, ghostly white flowers that bloomed for a single night a year. She called them her mooncatchers. Using a drone Ava had modified for stealth, we flew over the estate walls and, with a delicate robotic arm, deposited a single, perfect cereus blossom on the windshield of my father's Bentley, parked deep within his supposedly impenetrable garage. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a message from a ghost, an impossible token from a memory only he and I truly shared. 2 days later, we made our second move. His office in the Vance Tower was a fortress of soundproof solitude, but Ava found a back door into the building's integrated audio system. As he sat alone in his office reviewing quarterly reports, she pushed a file. It was less than 10 seconds of audio, a simple, haunting melody I had recorded myself. It was the lullaby our mother used to sing to me when I was sick, a song he hadn't heard in over 20 years. It played once, a faint, ethereal whisper from his hidden speakers, and then vanished. His security teams would sweep the office and find nothing. He would be a king haunted within his own castle. The final message was the most direct. Ava found a 1-hour window when the study at the estate would be empty, between his departure for the office and the arrival of the cleaning staff. We bypassed the security, a feat of digital acrobatics that left Ava grinning, and I sent in a micro-drone. It navigated the familiar hallways of my childhood home, a phantom tour of a life that no longer existed. It entered the study and deposited its cargo on the dead center of his vast, polished desk, a single, carved ivory chess piece. A white pawn. He had taught me the game, relentlessly drilling into me the value of strategy. Every piece has a purpose, Elara, he would say, but never underestimate the pawn. Given the chance, it can cross the entire board and bring down a king. While I was tormenting my father's psyche, Ava was building our weapon. It was a masterpiece of digital deception, a honeypot of unparalleled sophistication. We built a ghost system, a new, faster, more secure channel for laundering money, using the core architecture of Ethel itself. It was a siren song for criminals, promising absolute anonymity. We baited the hook by having one of Maria's contacts, a former accountant for the cartel who had turned informant, leak word of this internal upgrade to his old bosses. The message was simple. Julian Vance has a new toy, and he's saving it for his most important clients. Julian, as I knew he would, walked right into the trap. He was a cornered animal. His stock was down, the media was hounding him about his father's charity scandal, and Mateo Vargas was breathing down his neck. He needed to placate the cartel, to show strength and competence. When the Zetas demanded access to this new, exclusive system, he saw it as a salvation. He personally oversaw the transfer, a $200 million payment from a narco-state, destined to be washed clean through the Vance global machine. From our warehouse, we watched the data flow into our honeypot. It was a digital waterfall of pure criminality. We captured everything. Routing numbers, encrypted ledgers detailing a decade of transactions, IP addresses, shell corporations, and even voice-recorded authorizations from Julian himself, his voice tight with pressure. We had it all. The entire criminal conspiracy, gift-wrapped. We had the gun, the bullets, and his fingerprints all over them. Now it was time to face my brother. I sent him an anonymous, encrypted message, telling him to come to the old Adler Point Observatory at midnight. Alone. It was where our grandfather used to take us as children to look at the stars, a place where we once felt infinite. Now it was a ruin, its dome cracked open to the sky like a broken skull. He arrived, looking nervous and angry. He saw me step out of the shadows, and his face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, a flicker of fear. "Ellie! What the hell is this? You're the one who's been doing this." "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You look stressed. Running an empire is hard work, isn't it? Especially when it's built on lies." He scoffed, his bravado a flimsy shield. "What do you want? Money. You think you can blackmail me?" "You have nothing I want," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "But I have something you're terrified of losing. Everything." I took out a tablet and played him a 30-second clip. It was the audio of his voice authorizing the $200 million transfer, overlaid with the corresponding encrypted ledger data scrolling on the screen. The color drained from his face. He looked like he was going to be sick. "The Zetas, the feds, they'll kill me," he stammered, his arrogance crumbling into pathetic terror. "They will," I agreed. "But I'm going to offer you a choice. The same kind of choice you and Dad gave me." I stepped closer, the forgotten starlight painting patterns on the dusty floor between us. "I have enough to burn you, Dad, and half the Zeta cartel to the ground. In 24 hours, I'm sending it to every 3-letter agency in Washington. But I'm giving you a head start, a chance to run. In exchange, you are going to give me Dad." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What?" "I want every piece of secret leverage he has. Every dirty file. Every piece of insurance he's kept on his powerful friends. His entire secret history. I know he has it. You will give it to me, and you will disappear. You choose yourself, or you go down with him. Your call." I watched the war play out on his face. The lifetime of conditioning, of seeking our father's approval, fought against the primal instinct for self-preservation. For a moment, I thought the son might win out over the coward. I was wrong. The coward was all he had ever been. "His black server," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "He calls it the Aegis. It's a completely isolated server in the sub-basement of a tower. He thinks it's impenetrable. He keeps everything there. Insurance. On everyone." He pulled out his phone, his hand shaking, and typed out a string of characters. A set of credentials. A key to my father's secret kingdom. That's the root access. "Now let me go. Please, Ellie." I looked at the shell of the man who was once my brother, his face pale and pathetic in the moonlight. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. "Run far, Julian," I said, turning my back on him. "And don't ever stop." I returned to the warehouse, the victory tasting like ash in my mouth. Ava took the credentials and, with a look of fierce concentration, went to work. 10 minutes later, she was in. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she breathed, her eyes wide. "Ellie, this isn't just insurance. It's a nuclear bomb. He has compromise on senators, judges, federal agents, military contractors, and the cartel. Everything. It was all there. More than we could have dreamed. Financial records, wiretap transcripts, photos, videos, including a detailed file on Mateo Vargas, and a log of every payment Vance Global had made to him. And buried within that log, a single, recent transaction dated the day after my parole. The memo line contained only 2 words, "Handle Elara." The proof. We had it. The complete, undeniable story. We packaged it all into a single, encrypted file. The Vance revelation, Ava called it. My finger hovered over the mouse, the cursor blinking on the send button that would deliver the package simultaneously to the FBI, the SEC, the DEA, and the New York Times. This was it. The final move. Checkmate. Just as I was about to click, every monitor in the room flashed blood red. A piercing alarm shrieked through the warehouse. "What is that?" I yelled over the noise. "We're being traced," Ava screamed, her hands flying across her keyboard, a frantic blur of motion. "They're in our network. This isn't FBI. It's not corporate, my God. This is military grade. They're burning through my firewalls like they're not even there." On the central monitor, the rogue trace resolved, mapping its own source. It wasn't coming from Chicago. A message, stark white text on a blood-red background, materialized on the screen. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. "I see you." Below the words, a satellite image zoomed in with terrifying speed, bypassing cities and states, resolving on a fortified private compound in Langley, Virginia. An address I knew with sickening familiarity. It was my father's East Coast estate, the place he entertained the kind of people who didn't officially exist. He hadn't just been playing defense. He had been hunting me all along. And his hounds, far more vicious than I could have ever imagined, had just found us. The world dissolved into a cacophony of alarms and the frantic clicking of Ava's keyboard. My father's hounds were not just at the door. They were inside the walls, tearing through our digital defenses with brutal, terrifying efficiency. "They're coming," Ava yelled, ripping a hard drive from its bay. "They're not trying to hack us, Ellie. They're tracking our physical location. We have to go. Now." We plunged into the Chicago night, the warehouse that had been our fortress, now our tomb. I drove our anonymous panel van with a desperation I hadn't felt since my arrest, my knuckles white on the wheel. In the passenger seat, Ava, a laptop balanced on her knees, was our ghost in the machine. "They've got traffic camera access," she grunted, her eyes darting across lines of code. "Rerouting. Now." She'd execute a command, and 3 blocks ahead, a string of traffic lights would turn green, giving us a path while creating chaos behind us. They were hunters, but she was a poltergeist, and the city's infrastructure was her playground. We slipped through their net by a razor's edge, abandoning the van in a multi-story car park and disappearing into the arteries of the city's transit system. We found our sanctuary in a place no one would ever look, a small, unassuming brownstone in Pilsen. The door was opened by Maria Reyes. She was out. A fierce, brilliant smile creased her face as she pulled us inside. My anonymous tip, bolstered by a sliver of the evidence from Julian, had been enough for her lawyer to get her conviction overturned on appeal. She had been free for a month, and she had not been idle. The house was a command center, staffed by a small, quiet group of people, a disgraced journalist, a disbarred lawyer, a systems analyst fired for being a whistleblower. They were Maria's army, the ghosts of other people's wars, all wronged by men like my father. We were safe, but we were running out of time. News reports were already flashing across a television in the corner. Julian had vanished. Vance Global stock was in freefall. And my father, anticipating the storm, was liquidating his assets, preparing to bolt. The data we held was a ticking bomb. If he escaped the country, it would be a footnote, not a reckoning. The game had a deadline. Worse, the cartel was now a rogue element. With Julian gone, they would assume betrayal. Their network was exposed, and they would be looking for someone to blame, someone to silence. They would be hunting Marcus, but they would also be hunting me. We were caught in a tightening vice between my father's private army, a vengeful cartel, and the slow-moving gears of federal law enforcement. Leaking the data is no longer enough, I told Maria and Ava, the plan forming in my mind, cold and clear. He'll be on a plane to a non-extradition country before the FBI finishes their first press conference. I can't win this from the shadows. I have to look him in the eye when his world ends. The plan was a bluff, aimed directly at the heart of his pride, his legacy. Using a military-grade encryption key from my father's own black server, I sent him a single untraceable message. I told him I had the only existing copy of the original Ethel source code, the pure, uncorrupted version, my masterpiece. And I was going to release it open source to the world, making his company's flagship technology worthless overnight. Unless he agreed to meet me. 1 hour. Face to face. No contractors. No lawyers. The location was non-negotiable, the main boardroom on the top floor of Vance Global Tower. His throne room. I knew his ego couldn't resist. A king does not allow a pawn to dictate the terms of his surrender without looking her in the eye. He agreed. The Vance Tower loomed against the bruised purple of the evening sky, a glass and steel monument to my family's sins. I had tipped the FBI, telling them a major criminal transaction was taking place in that boardroom. They surrounded the building, a silent, waiting army. But I knew my father. He would have his own men inside, his own exit strategy. He would never allow himself to be trapped. I rode the private elevator to the top floor, the ascent silent and smooth. The doors opened, and there he was. He stood by the great glass window overlooking the city, a glass of scotch in his hand, just as he had been the night he condemned me. He looked older, the mask of control showing fine cracks, but his eyes were as hard as ever. "Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble." "You call this trouble?" I said, stopping on the other side of the vast boardroom table. "I call it balancing the ledger. I built all of this." He swept a hand toward the glittering city below. "From nothing. Sometimes, to build an empire, sacrifices are necessary. I did what I had to do to protect this family, to protect your brother. You didn't protect a family. You destroyed it." I shot back, my voice shaking with a decade of repressed fury. "You fed your daughter to the wolves to save your favorite son. You sold your soul to murderers. For what? For this room. For this view." He actually smiled, a cold, thin-lipped expression. "You still don't understand power. You think this is the end. It isn't. I have contingencies you can't possibly imagine. My associates are already waiting for me. This building, this company, it's just a shell. I will build another." He took a step toward me. "It's not too late. You are still my blood. You have my intellect, my fire. Come with me. Help me build again." It was the ultimate test. The devil on the mountaintop, offering me the world he had stolen from me. The old Elara might have wept. She might have screamed. But she was long dead. "No," I said, my voice flat and cold. "It's over." He chuckled. "You have nothing, Elara. You tipped off the feds, but my men will have me out of this building before they can even get a warrant for the elevator. You lose." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "You see, the Ethel source code, that was a bluff, a distraction to get you in this room. My real final move was for someone else." He frowned, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "While you were focusing on me," I continued, "Ava was talking to the Zetas. Not to Mateo Vargas, but to his ambitious second-in-command. We fed him selected files from your Aegis server. Files that proved you were skimming off their top, that you had an escape plan that didn't include them, and that you were the one who built the honeypot to trap them for the feds. You were going to sell them out to save yourself." The color drained from his face as understanding dawned. He turned toward the elevator, his hand reaching for his phone. The boardroom doors slid open.